the 5 most surprising things that I've learned about parental alienation since putting a term to the abuse that I went through for 20 years. Hi, I'm Maddie, and welcome to the Anti-Alienation Project. If you're not familiar with me or what I do here, I talk about everything related to a certain form of severe child psychological abuse known as parental alienation. If you're wondering what parental alienation is, it's kind of what it sounds like. It usually involves one angry parent during a custody dispute or a divorce, often, but not always, who goes on an obsessive rampage to manipulate their children into rejecting their other loving parent without true justification. It's a really serious and long-lasting, devastating form of abuse and domestic abuse by proxy. It's happened to me, unfortunately, starting during my parents' divorce, and the alienation really solidified for me at age 9. My parents got divorced. For the next 20 years, I rejected my dad, being made to believe that he didn't love me, that he was abusive, that he was selfish, narcissistic. So I rejected him, thinking that I was standing up to injustice, thinking that I was doing the right thing. But all along, I was just a puppet in my mom's life, puppet in her show. 2 years ago, I learned the truth, that I had been abused for 20 years, forced to live in a fabricated reality where my dad didn't love me. And since then, I've been working on healing, rebuilding my relationship with my dad, forming a coalition of other adult child survivors of parental alienation and abduction, as well as speaking out about this form of abuse. So let's get right into it. 5 things that I've learned about parental alienation that I can't believe are true. I'll give my 2 disclaimers before we start. Like always, number 1, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a clinician or a therapist, just someone who has the 20 years of being alienated from a parent. Number 2, I don't speak for all alienated kids. This is just my story, my experience. What is the first most surprising thing that I've learned about parental alienation? Well, there have been a lot of surprising things, but one thing that has shocked me is that effects on the child are similar to the effects on the targeted parent. Not the exact same, but similar. This is something that I noticed and even asked Professor Ben Hine during our interview. I'll insert that clip here. As Professor Hine explains, the effects of this abuse are very similar for parent and child alike, including PTSD, depression, anxiety, social withdrawal, suicidal ideation, even developing health conditions like autoimmune disorders. On the one hand, it makes sense to me why the child and the parent would be having the same effects. If we think about this type of abuse, as long as personality disorders are in existence, parental alienation will be too. You can't eradicate it forever, and anyone who tells you they can eradicate it forever is full of baloney, because if there are personality disorders, specifically NPD and BDP, there will be parental alienation, and that, I believe, is why the effects of this abuse are so similar and predictable, and they follow predictable patterns. Alienators all have the same 6 tactics, and I believe it's because they come from the same personality disorders, and I believe that's why they have the same effects on their victims, because this abuse all stems from the same pathogen. The second most surprising and honestly disheartening thing that I've learned about parental alienation is that, according to Dr. Amy Baker, if the alienation extends into adulthood, 50% of alienated kids will go on to become either targeted parents themselves or alienators themselves. When I first heard the stat, I didn't want to believe it. But since meeting more and more people who've been alienating from a parent in our support group, it's my own opinion that I think this number is probably higher than 50%. From what I can tell, talking to other people now for over a year, I think the main way that people figure out they were alienated as a child is by becoming alienated from their own children. This should be the last way that people have to figure it out. And right now, I think it's the majority right now. So this abuse is often generational, and I think that makes sense about why it would be. For example, my mom was definitely alienated from her dad. But instead of recognizing that that's not normal, that's abuse, that's psychological abuse, she just, I guess, thought it was normal and did the same thing to me and won't take accountability for it. And it might be hard in part for people to take accountability for having done this to their child, because that would mean, if it's generational in their case, that would mean they have to take accountability. They have to keep their own parent accountable for alienating them, for doing the same thing to them. That's why this is so hard when it's generational. It's to admit that I was abused. My mom would have to admit that she was abused. And I don't think that there is ever going to be a time where that's going to happen. The third most surprising thing that I have learned, when I first learned the truth about parental alienation, I was shocked. I really couldn't believe that it had taken till 28 years old for me to learn the term parental alienation. I was actually a little angry at society in general. Like, why didn't I learn about this sooner? You know, I could have had more time. I could have been getting better faster. I could have had more of my life where I wasn't just a shell of myself. Now that I've talked to several experts and read research, to my third point, experts estimate currently, if severe alienation extends into adulthood, only 5 to 10% of children will figure it out currently. That's the way it stands. And when I heard this during my interview with Dr. Bill Burnett, I was horrified. I think my jaw dropped. It's a hard pill to swallow. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be a miracle for people to figure out they have been abused. Otherwise, I mean, it's hard to not think that it's a wasted lifetime. They could have been tapping into their potential, and instead it just dies with them. It's a really hard pill to swallow for parents, I imagine, and for other former alienated children who look around it and think there are so many more people who are living in their parents' lie, and that's scary. It's disappointing that so few people discover it. It's a very disappointing fact. But it's important for others to be aware of these numbers, even if they're low, especially because they are low. People need to know kids are not coming back. People need to know the kids are not coming back. If you do a Google search, other organizations like the National Safe Parent Organization has taken over Google, so that if you Google, do alienated kids come back, they cite some baloney statistic that 95% of children come back. It's hogwash. That is for all cases. That's for mild cases. That's for moderate cases. We're talking severe cases, and one classification of severe alienation, I believe, is that it extends into adulthood. So if it extends into adulthood, 5 to 10% come back. And please don't get disheartened or particularly depressed by this statistic. We have to start somewhere, and the fact that all of these targeted parents are speaking out, but where are the adult children? That's what I've said from the start. The number is low, and if that number wasn't so low, I don't think I'd be doing this. We need to fight harder for this, for changes, for exposure, for awareness, so we can have societal pressure on the legislators, the politicians, the people who can make change to the systems that enable this. Number 4, the fourth most surprising thing about parental alienation to me is that 95% of alienators have personality disorders. This is both surprising and not surprising. I've always known that there was something off with my alienator parent, so it makes total sense, the personality disorder part of it, but I didn't realize that the number was quite so high. And also, it was confusing for me to learn that, because I had always been told that my dad has narcissistic personality disorder. If anybody else has been through something like that, leave in the comments below. Were you super confused when you realized that you had it all backwards? Is this just all projection? Like, do they tell you that your bad parent has a personality disorder so that you don't find out that they actually have a personality disorder? Is that what's going on? Is that what's going on? I don't know. Are you surprised by the statistic about the personality disorders? I don't know. Like I said before, I understand, and it makes sense that they all have the same pathogen, because The predictability of this abuse is astounding. Similar effects, similar alienating tactics, despite location, despite gender, age, social class, etc. The tactics are the same, the effects on the child are the same. I also think that this statistic is important to know because severe alienators can be dangerous people. Not always, but they can be dangerous people. Knowing that your severe alienator has a personality disorder can also equip survivors to seek out knowledge, the right information and resources to get help and to equip themselves for managing life with that person. Knowledge is power. The fifth and final really surprising thing about the abuse I experienced for 20 years to me was that this is so common. Experts like Dr. Harmon have found in the research that there are an estimated of 22 million targeted parents in the United States alone. When I first figured out parental alienation was a big part of my life story, I assumed this was really rare. I mean, otherwise, wouldn't I have put the pieces together a long time ago? Wouldn't I have heard of this phrase in some type of child development course? I don't know. Wouldn't I have known? How come it took so long? This is the frustrating part of it because it's so common. Everybody knows somebody. I promise you, even if you aren't aware, you know somebody who has been through this abuse, whether it's a grandparent who hasn't been able to see their grandkids, or a parent who lost their children to this abuse, or a child who's grown up maybe still believing that one of their parents doesn't love them. I promise you, everybody knows somebody. And that is what is so surprising to me, having lived through it for 20 years, having been unable to figure out the truth because I didn't ever learn about the term. I never heard the term. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why I want this abuse to be on the public's consciousness. I want the everyday person, most people, to know what this is, to know the signs, to recognize the symptoms in a child, to stand up to injustice, to shame alienating behaviors, be able to educate and inform people about why it is so damaging to a child to brainwash them to reject their other parent without true justification. You can never replace a parent. If you turn your child against their other loving parent for your own selfish gain, even if your intention is not to harm your child, you are going to leave a gaping wound inside of them that will never close. At least not until they reconnect with that parent. And even then, you will have a festering scar. For the rest of their life, they will have a festering scar. When you decide to confide in your child as if they're your therapist, as if they're your friend, when you give them information about your marital problems or your divorce that they should not have at a young age. And when you make them believe that their other parent is unloving, uncaring, selfish, bad, abusive, crazy, whatever it may be, that is the day you took away their childhood. I don't care if your parent did this to you. Do better for your children. And let them love both parents. That's all for this video. I'm really curious though, what are the 5 most surprising things that you've learned about parental alienation? I would love to hear in the comments some of the most shocking things that you've learned in your journey, trying to recover, heal, and survive. Sometimes these videos are not easy to make, like today's. It's a little dark, it's a little depressing, or maybe a lot depressing. But this is information that I want the whole world to know. So I hope you found this video insightful or helpful. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.